James was born into a poor family. However, when he got into college, something extraordinary happened that most people wouldn't even dream of. From a young age, James was known to be exceptionally bright. His parents wanted to provide him with a quality education, but their financial situation made it impossible. They always regretted this, but fortunately, James studied hard and got into college with a scholarship for all 4 years. Since the college was located in a region far from James's home, he had to move away. His parents were poor farmers. They called his uncle, who lived near the school. The uncle, a successful businessman in the area, had always been fond of James since he was a child. He happily invited James to stay with him, as he had plenty of rooms in his house, though James felt a bit awkward about it. Given his parents' situation, he decided to stay with his uncle. The uncle had married early, but had a son late in life, who was a high school student. James offered to tutor his cousin, and decided to look for tutoring jobs as soon as possible. His aunt, named Emily, was a year older than his mother, and exuded confidence and ease from her financial independence. She was also beautiful and looked much younger than her age. One day, when James went home, he saw Emily in a pretty dress, looking at herself in the mirror after shopping. The beautiful sight of Emily that day was unforgettable. As the first semester was coming to an end, James' mother visited Emily's house. She felt guilty for not being able to provide for her son and brought some money she had saved from a good season in agriculture, saying, "Brother, let me treat you properly today. I've been too busy to take care of my son. Thanks to you, I could work with peace of mind." Emily responded, "I was so surprised at how wonderfully James has grown up. Our son's grades have improved a lot since he started learning from James." And they went to a restaurant in a warm atmosphere. After handling all her busy work, James's mother stayed at Emily's house for a few days before they went home together. The night his mother arrived, James slept in the same room as her. He woke up needing to use the bathroom and noticed his mother wasn't there. James looked for her around the house. She wasn't in the bathroom or the kitchen. The uncle's house had a total of 5 rooms, one of which was used as a closet. But he heard voices coming from the closet room. Whispers of a man and woman could be heard. So I crept closer to the room to listen. It seemed like it was Mom and Uncle John together. What could they possibly have to discuss at this hour? I perked up my ears, and Mom was saying, "I've missed you so much. I should have come earlier, I'm sorry." And Uncle John said, "You've become so beautiful, haven't you? I'll ask James to go shopping at Emily's so you can eat lots of delicious food and stay for a long time." I involuntarily covered my mouth. Mom laughed. "Brother, how can our little one be so healthy? He really takes after us. Ha ha." And the strength drained from me as I returned to my room. My heart was a mess. Seeing Mom like this and realizing she and Uncle John weren't just close, I was utterly confused. I barely made it through classes that day and came home to find Mom had already left, even though she had said we would go home together. Did Mom realize I saw her with Uncle John? I wanted to tell Emily about what happened last night, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I turned on my computer to do some homework, but I couldn't focus at all. I greeted Uncle John when he came home from work, but deep down, I wanted to confront him about his relationship with my mom. Yet I forced myself to hold back. I tried to calm myself and sat down at my desk again. With my mind in turmoil, I couldn't do anything and went to open the bathroom door, only to find Emily showering. "Oh dear, I forgot to lock the door," she said, crouching down. I silently closed the door and went back to my room. After that day, I couldn't meet Emily's eyes. However, Emily, being kind and easygoing, treated me just like before. "Emily, I forgot to knock. I'll make sure to knock next time," I said. And Emily replied, "It's okay. Not locking the door was my big mistake," as she prepared dinner. Uncle John had gone to work, and my cousin wouldn't be back from tutoring until 11 p.m. Emily asked if I had plans for the evening. I told her I had an exam in the morning and planned to rest at home. Emily casually hugged me and said, "Eat something nice after your exam," as she gave me some pocket money. After the exam, I bought peaches that Emily likes. "I'm so proud of you for doing well this semester at our home, James," she continued. "But James, have you ever had a girlfriend?" she asked, and I shyly replied, "No, I haven't found someone I like yet." Emily then teased, "Leaving such a healthy, handsome, and smart guy like you single, huh? You guys have all the geniuses at your school, but it seems like they can't judge character," he joked, munching on a peach. Emily hesitated for a moment before admitting, "Speaking of which, I've been having a really tough time lately." James caught onto Emily's cue and stayed with her late into the night. Emily quietly accepted James's awkwardness, making herself comfortable. It was James's first time feeling this way, but with Emily naturally taking the lead, he was able to relax. After a while, with a satisfied smile, Emily suggested, "Let's have some meat. It's been a tough day," and they shared a light embrace after eating. Her uncle came home late, and Emily stashed the prepared meat in the back of the fridge, serving up simple side dishes instead. James found Emily's actions endearingly amusing, barely holding back a chuckle. Even as the semester came to a close, James found it hard to leave Emily behind and head home. Emily encouraged him, "You've finished your first semester, so go home, spend some time with your parents, meet up with friends, and just relax." On the day he left, he hugged Emily and reassured her, "Just wait a little bit for me, beautiful." After spending a week at home, James rushed back to Emily, who greeted him with good news. "I've got something exciting to share. I've been recommended to tutor 2 students." Thanks to Emily, James started tutoring and decided to give half of his tutoring fees to Emily. They had reached a point in their relationship where a single glance was enough to communicate. Her uncle, whose workdays always ran late, felt that James brought a new lease on life, treating him with great affection. Emily told James that he should feel free to make friends at school, warning him that he might regret not experiencing young love later in life. James responded, "I'll let you know if I get a girlfriend, but for now, there's no need. Nobody is as beautiful as you, Emily. Just stay by my side." James could hardly believe he was in such a relationship with the kind and beautiful Emily, and decided to keep the issues with his mom and uncle to himself.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
My name is Ben Harris. I'm a 42-year-old manager at a construction firm in Los Angeles. I met my wife, Kathy, 12 years ago when she was 21, working as a file clerk just outside my office. What caught my attention first were the tight jeans she wore that hugged her hips perfectly. She was young, attractive, and left quite an impression. At the time, I had been divorced from my first wife for about 4 years and had no children. I always wanted kids, though, and with Kathy working nearby and handling the project files, it felt like things just fell into place. We started having lunch together, and after a few weeks, I invited her to spend the weekend with me. It was a great weekend. Good company, good chemistry, and we started dating seriously after that. A couple of months passed before Kathy told me she was pregnant. I was excited but also direct. I asked her if she wanted an abortion or if she wanted to get married. She didn't want an abortion, so the next weekend, we had a small, private wedding. I was thrilled. At 30, I felt ready to start a family, to be a dad, and I wanted to be young enough to enjoy every part of my kids' lives. But something shifted in Kathy after that. She became quiet, withdrawn, and pregnancy was not something she enjoyed. At the time, I thought maybe it was just the strain of carrying a child, but I later realized it was more than that. Kathy had married me not because she wanted to build a family, but to escape her mother's house. She had no real interest in having children and had even aborted 2 pregnancies from a previous relationship. That was something I didn't learn until much later. About 3 months before the birth of our first son, Kathy quit her job to become a full-time homemaker and prepare for motherhood. Our second and third sons arrived shortly after, and within 3.5 years, we had 3 healthy, energetic boys. With 3 young kids to look after, Kathy was constantly busy and often exhausted by the time I got home from work. I truly appreciated her dedication as a mom, but as her energy for parenting increased, her desire for intimacy seemed to fade. The gradual decline in our physical relationship left me feeling a bit on edge. I noticed that Kathy's attitude began to change when she turned 30. The kids were now all in grade school, and I had assumed Kathy would be able to relax a bit more and pay more attention to me. Unfortunately, our sex life continued to remain at a low ebb. I never really knew what Kathy was doing during the day with the kids in school. I looked back at what my mom used to do: cleaning the house, doing the laundry, shopping for food and the kids' clothes, taking the kids to soccer practice. I assumed Kathy's day would be pretty much the same as what I had seen my mom do. One day, Kathy approached me after dinner and told me she would like to find a part-time job. She said she was getting bored staying at home by herself during the day. I was a little concerned because I didn't see how she could make lunches, get the kids off to school, clean house, do the laundry, take the kids to soccer practice, go shopping, and still find the time for a job. I was worried that her health may suffer from plain exhaustion. Kathy spent a few weeks looking, and then by word of mouth found a part-time job as a bookkeeper for a small local gym. She told me that she would be given a free membership and would only work from 8 a.m. until noon. This would allow her to get the kids off to school and come home after work to do the necessary chores before the kids got home. She told me that if there was ever an emergency at school, the school could reach her at work, and she would only be 10 minutes away. Kathy's appeared to have thought this out carefully, and I could find no flaw in her logic. So I told her, go for it. Kathy started work and seemed to get an emotional lift from having to interface with adults at work. Things seemed to settle into a well-established routine, and Kathy's demeanor substantially improved. A few months after she started work, Kathy approached me with a request to take advantage of the gym's free membership. She wanted to go to the gym early in the morning from 4:30 a.m. to 6 a.m. to exercise, then come back home to get the kids off to school, and then head off to work at 8 a.m. Because of my commute, I had to leave the house at 6:30 a.m., so I really didn't see any conflict with the family's overall schedule. A few months went by and I began to notice Kathy getting her old figure back. She had dropped 20 pounds and was now carrying 120 pounds on her 5 feet minus 4 inches frame. When I complimented her on her efforts, she surprised me by telling me she felt her boobs were too small. She told me she wanted breast enhancements to make her boobs perky again. I realized after having 3 kids, she deserved the implants, especially if it would improve our stale sex life. Kathy got her implants, and it took her a couple of weeks to fully recover. Apparently, the surgeon inserted the implants through her armpits to make them look and feel more realistic. He did a very good job, and she was ecstatic with the results. Kathy again returned to her part-time job and early morning workouts. Things got back into the groove of everyday family life. But that was soon to change dramatically. It was early Saturday morning and I was cleaning out Kathy's car. As I took out the floor mat on the driver's side, I noticed a small cellophane bag underneath the car seat. I pulled out the small bag and noticed it was partially filled with white powder. I had no idea what was in the bag, but the possibility that the bag contained drugs crossed my mind. I began to get an uneasy feeling. Where would Kathy get drugs? Could the drugs belong to a friend? What in the hell was going on? What was Kathy doing during the day? I decided not to tell Kathy what I had found. I needed time to think things out and talk to an old friend who lived life walking on the fence. If the substance in the bag was a drug, my bud Timothy would know. That afternoon, I asked Kathy if she could take the kids to their soccer games because I needed to get an oil change for my car. I told her I would be back in a couple hours. I left the house and headed across town to Timothy's apartment. Just as I was about to knock on Timothy's door, the door opened and Timothy bent down to grab his newspaper. It had been a couple of years and Timothy was surprised to see me. I told him the kids, family life, and weekend soccer games was keeping me busy and chasing skirts with my old single buds was probably not practical. When he laughed, I told him I needed a favor. He told me, "That's what friends are for." I entered his apartment and I showed him what I had found under Kathy's car seat. He opened the bag, wet his index finger, and tapped the white substance. He brought out a small amount on his fingertip, looked at it, and touched it to his tongue. Timothy casually said, "Meth?" I stood there stunned. What was Kathy doing with meth? And who had given it to her? I must have looked bewildered for Timothy told me to sit down. Timothy saw the look in my face and asked me about Kathy. I told him she was working part-time as a bookkeeper at a local gym. He laughed and said, "Gyms were a haven for drugs. Steroids, meth, and cocaine were the usual suspects, and the most trainers wind up banging their housewife clients. It is very common." But he mentioned this may just be the tip of the iceberg of Kathy's shenanigans. I started to get a sinking feeling in my stomach. I think Timothy saw the blood drain from my face. Timothy looked at me and said, "You need to hire a PI. They will be discreet and are professionals. If you follow her and find her having sex with some guy, what are you going to do? Punch the guy out and get arrested for battery. And you may even lose the fight and give him a get-out-of-jail-free card to beat the hell out of you claiming self-defense? Punch her out and get arrested for felony spousal abuse? You're the one who would go to jail, and you're the one who would suffer as Big Bubas's bitch. All you would do is leave the door wide open for Kathy to continue her affair, and she would probably have the guy move into your home while you were in jail. When you got out, you would have nothing. California is a no-fault state, so her adultery would be ignored. But it gets worse. If you could not support her and your kids because you were incarcerated, the courts would take your 401k and retirement funds to use for spousal and child support. And remember, there is nothing to stop you wife from using those funds to support her lover. You would have effectively thrown away your life up to this point. When you are finally released from prison, you would carry the stigma of being an ex-con to every potential employer you contact. Unless you can start your own business, which is highly unlikely, you will be forced to take a job, if you can even find one, at a fraction of the pay of your current position. Timothy went on, "We have been friends for a long time, so I want you to hire a PI, and I want you to bring me all the information he finds. If she is taking drugs, you need to get her into a rehab facility for the sake of your children and the stability of their home. However, if she has committed adultery and you have done nothing to encourage that particular behavior, then she has lost respect for you and has disregarded the welfare of her children. If that is the case, you will never gain back her respect, and you need to take the kind of action that will allow you to walk away from this situation with your pride and your balls intact. No woman is ever sorry she cheated on her husband. She is only sorry that she got caught. A woman who is unfaithful fully intended her actions. She knew exactly what she is doing. It is a selfish act that totally disregards the feelings of her husband and family. And remember, the next time for her gets easier and easier. However, if she was drugged, then she was not cheating, but she was involuntarily assaulted." Timothy continued, "Women are different than men. From their late 20s to their late 30s, women's hormones are running wild. They are at the same runaway hormone level as an 18-year-old guy. Any woman who has been married for a few years and hits that cycle is looking for a new sex partner. Whether they successfully find it is another question. With the divorce rate in the Los Angeles basin at 65%, with 85% instigated by the wife, for first marriages and 80% for second marriages, and with an overall female infidelity rate of 50%, equates to a lot of wives screwing on their first and second husbands with no remorse. It appears that few women learn their lesson, but most continue their infidelity in subsequent marriages. Remember, not only does it get easier and easier, but the grass is always greener on the other side of the hill until you have to mow the lawn. Well, Ben, that is why I stayed single. I just saw too much in my line of work as a PI. With the divorce laws the way they are, men, in general, are fighting an uphill battle. And remember, Ben, it is a war to get the upper hand. Men don't marry partners. They marry adversaries and spend the rest of their lives suffering in silence. I left Timothy's apartment that afternoon shaken to the core. I took the business card of the PI Timothy handed me. I would call the PI Monday. I wasn't going to be emotional and mentally abused by anyone's runaway hormones. 2 weeks later, I stared in disbelief at the PI's report. Apparently, Kathy was meeting a trainer from the gym during her early morning workout. They had a routine worked out where they met at 4:30 a.m., spent a half hour screwing in the back of her car, and then went in for a workout when the gym opened at 5 a.m. It had never occurred to me to check what time the gym opened. I felt like an idiot. I had trusted her, and she had deceived me and the kids. I was not sad, nor was I heartbroken. I was experiencing ice-cold rage. The trainer turned out to be a small-time drug dealer who dealt in steroids and meth. I called Timothy and told him I would be stopping by with the PI's report. The drive through cross-town traffic was miserable. 45 minutes later, I was ringing Timothy's door. Timothy opened the door, invited me in, and motioned me to sit down. Timothy slowly digested the PI's report and gently handed it back to me. He told me to listen very carefully. First, Timothy said, "You must not do anything that will make her suspicious. It is imperative that she does not suspect you know anything. This coming Monday, I want you to. I work early Monday around 4:15 a.m. Kathy was just getting out of the shower and went over to put on her gym shorts and top. I wondered if she was even wearing panties. Probably not. I lay in our bed pretending to be asleep. Once she went downstairs, I quietly got out of bed, slipped into my clothes and waited until I heard the garage door open. I heard the garage door close and I quickly went downstairs, put on my gloves, grabbed my camera with a telephoto lens, and went into the garage. I opened the truck to my car and pulled out Kathy's original plastic bag and 2 additional plastic bags of meth that Timothy had given me on my last visit. I took the bags and my camera, laid them on the passenger seat of my car, opened the garage and headed down the road towards Kathy's gym. As I approached the gym, I killed my lights and parked about 50 yards away from the gym's parking lot. I picked up my camera, the 3 bags of plastic, and exited the car. As I approached the parking lot under the cover of the bushes, I noticed Kathy's car parked a slot away from an older Ford Bronco. I couldn't see anyone in the Bronco, but I did notice some movement in the back seat of Kathy's car. I crept up to the Bronco and slowly opened the driver's door and tossed 2 of the plastic bags into the passenger's seat. I then kept low and snuck around the front of the Bronco and tossed the last plastic bag on the ground by the back seat of Kathy's car. I looked up and I could see Kathy's head by the far window. She getting pounded doggy style by a male I had never met. I assumed it was her trainer. I crept back out of the parking lot and went around the corner. I pulled out the untraceable cell phone I had purchased with 30 minutes of time and dialed 911. I gave the operator a fake name, the address of the gym, and told her that I was witnessing a rape and child abduction in progress. I told her the male suspect may be armed. I ran across the street and hid in the bushes poised with my camera and telephoto lens. In less than 3.5 minutes, 2 squad cars pulled up without their sirens and with their headlights off. Simultaneously, they drove into the parking lot and turned on their headlights on the 2 cars. The cops opened their squad car doors and stood behind them with their guns drawn. I could hear the cops through the bullhorn telling the occupants of the car to exit the vehicle now with their hands on top of their head. An unknown male emerged first wearing only his boxer shorts. Kathy, still topless, came out next wearing her gym shorts. Both occupants were told to turn around and place their hands against the car. 2 cops, under the cover of the other 2 cops, approached Kathy and her friend, grabbed their hands one at a time, and handcuffed their hands behind their back. I saw one cop bend down and pick up a plastic bag. He then showed it to the other cop and motioned for the other 2 backup cops to come over. 2 of the cops went over to the Bronco and opened both front doors. One cop came back holding 2 additional plastic bags. The cops conversed for a couple of minutes, ran a check on the license plates of the 2 cars, and checked the driver licenses they had found in Kathy's car and the Bronco. Although I didn't have much light, I was snapping pictures as fast as I could. I then saw the cops take Kathy and put her in the back seat of one squad car, and her friend went into the back seat of the other squad car. Then the squad cars drove away. I headed back to my car and drove home. When I got home, the kids were still asleep. 6 o'clock came around, so I woke the kids up to get them ready for school. At 7:30 a.m., I drove the kids to school. I thought to myself that I was doing a pretty good job as Mr. Mom. I drove home and called my boss to let him know I would not be coming in that day. About 11 a.m., I got a collect call from a sobbing Kathy telling me she needed to be bailed out of jail. She and her trainer had been arrested at the gym for possession of an illegal substance. I said I would find out what her bail was and see what I could do. She was crying as she hung up. I called my attorney and told him I wanted to file for divorce that week and to request supervised visits for Kathy. I also wanted him to obtain a restraining order against Kathy to stay away from the kids and not come within 100 yards of my home. Finally, I let out a sigh of relief. I walked over to my liquor cabinet, took out my bottle of Johnny Walker Blue Label, and poured about half my glass. I went into the living room and, as I looked at her smiling photo, I quietly said, "You filthy 304, you can rot in jail. You will never come back to my home." Dear listeners, Please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Emily's heart skipped a beat as she opened the elegant wedding invitation and saw Jack's name on the guest list. Memories of their passionate love and painful divorce surged back, leaving her torn. Should she face her ex-husband after 5 years? Despite her stable new life, Emily yearned for closure. As the wedding day approached, anxiety bubbled, but she resolved to attend, steeling herself for the encounter. The picturesque venue and familiar faces couldn't distract her from Jack's presence. Their dance and raw conversations that night brought healing, understanding, and a peaceful resolution, allowing Emily to embrace a hopeful new beginning. Hello, my friends. I hope all you are fine. This is Narrative Stories channel. Let's start this story. Emily stood at her kitchen counter, absently sipping her morning coffee, when she noticed an elegant cream-colored envelope among her usual pile of bills and junk mail. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakably Sarah's, her college roommate, and one of her oldest friends. Emily's curiosity piqued as she carefully opened the envelope and pulled out an intricately designed wedding invitation. As she read the details, her eyes widened in surprise and apprehension. The invitation was for Sarah's wedding, a joyous occasion to be sure, but her heart sank when she saw Jack's name on the guest list. Jack, her ex-husband, the man she had once envisioned spending her entire life with, would be there too. Mixed emotions surged through Emily, memories of their passionate love, their wedding day, and the eventual unraveling of their marriage flooded her mind. It had been 5 years since their painful divorce, and although time had dulled the sharp edges of her grief, the thought of seeing Jack again stirred a pot of emotions she had long tried to suppress. She placed the invitation back on the counter, taking a deep breath. Should she attend? The idea of facing Jack after all these years was daunting, yet something inside her whispered that this might be the closure she needed. She decided to give herself time to reflect before making a decision. For days, Emily wrestled with her decision. Every time she thought about attending the wedding, anxiety bubbled up within her. She would have to confront the man who had once been her everything and had also been the source of her deepest pain. Emily recalled their tumultuous marriage, filled with passionate highs and devastating lows. They had loved fiercely, but also hurt each other deeply. Their breakup had left her shattered, but over the years, she had painstakingly rebuilt her life, piece by piece. Now, she was stable, with a fulfilling job, a cozy apartment, and a supportive circle of friends. As the wedding date approached, Emily weighed her options. She could skip the event and avoid the emotional turmoil of seeing Jack. But a part of her yearned for the chance to see him again, to gauge how much they both had changed, and perhaps to find some closure. After much contemplation, she decided to go. This wedding would be a test of her emotional strength, a way to prove to herself that she had moved on. Emily knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to face her past head-on, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. She RSVP'd yes and began preparing herself mentally for the encounter. The day of the wedding arrived, and Emily found herself driving through scenic countryside to reach the picturesque venue. Nestled among rolling hills and blooming wildflowers, the location was as enchanting as Sarah had always dreamed. As Emily stepped out of her car, a wave of nostalgia washed over her. She had attended so many weddings with Jack, and now here she was, alone. Clad in a simple yet elegant dress, she took a deep breath and walked towards the gathering crowd. Familiar faces greeted her with warm smiles, and she exchanged pleasantries with old friends, feeling a mix of comfort and trepidation. As she made her way to her seat, she spotted Jack standing across the lawn, talking to a group of guests. Their eyes met briefly, and in that fleeting moment, a flurry of old emotions stirred within her. Jack looked much the same, perhaps a bit more mature, with a touch of gray at his temples. She quickly averted her gaze, focusing instead on the ceremony that was about to begin. Sarah, looking radiant in her wedding gown, walked down the aisle, and the beautiful ceremony unfolded with heartfelt vows and loving glances. Despite the joyous occasion, Emily found herself distracted by the thought of Jack's presence, the memories of their past dancing at the edges of her consciousness. With the ceremony concluded, the reception commenced in a beautifully decorated marquee. Guests mingled, the air filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses. Emily wandered through the crowd, feeling a strange mix of belonging and isolation. As she approached the cocktail bar, she saw Jack making his way toward her. Her heart raced, but she managed a polite smile. "Hi, Emily," Jack greeted her, his voice carrying a hint of the familiarity they once shared. "It's good to see you." "Hi, Jack," Emily replied, her tone equally polite but strained. They exchanged the usual pleasantries about their lives since the divorce, each trying to sound casual while their minds raced with unspoken thoughts. Emily's friends soon pulled her away into lively conversations, but she couldn't shake the awareness of Jack's presence. Every time she glanced around the room, her eyes seemed to find him. As the evening wore on and the dance floor opened up, Emily found herself standing on the sidelines, watching the couples sway to the music. Suddenly, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see Jack standing there, his hand extended in invitation. "May I have this dance?" he asked. Emily hesitated, 1,000 thoughts running through her mind, but she eventually placed her hand in his. It was time to break the ice. Emily felt a rush of mixed emotions as she and Jack moved onto the dance floor. The band played a slow melodic tune, and they began to sway in unison. The initial awkwardness hung between them like a thick fog, but as they settled into the rhythm, the tension began to ease. "You look great, Emily," Jack said softly, his eyes searching hers for a reaction. "Thank you," she replied, offering a small smile. "You do too." They started with small talk about their lives since the divorce. Jack mentioned his new job and how he had moved to a different city. Emily spoke about her career advancements and the supportive friends she had made. As they danced, the familiarity of their movements brought back memories of happier times. Gradually, the conversation turned deeper, and they decided to step outside for some fresh air and privacy. Finding a quiet corner in the garden, Emily and Jack continued their conversation. They began to delve into the reasons behind their separation, discussing the misunderstandings and the mistakes they both had made. Emily spoke about the hurt she felt when Jack's career ambitions overshadowed their relationship, while Jack admitted to not realizing how much he had neglected her needs. The conversation was raw and honest, each revelation peeling back layers of old wounds. As the night deepened, the emotions between Emily and Jack became more intense. "I regret a lot of things," Jack confessed, his voice tinged with sorrow. "I was so focused on my career that I lost sight of what really mattered. I never intended to hurt you, but I see now how much I did." Emily felt tears welling up, but held them back, determined to stay composed. "I was hurt, Jack, deeply, but I've also had time to heal and reflect. I realize now that I had my own faults too. I depended on you for my happiness instead of finding it within myself." They continued to share their feelings, each word helping to mend the fractures in their hearts. Emily talked about how she had changed over the years, learning to be more independent and self-reliant. Jack spoke about his own journey of self-discovery and how he had learned to value relationships over ambitions. They began to see their past from each other's perspectives, understanding the pain they had caused, but also recognizing the love they once shared. Through this heartfelt dialogue, Emily and Jack started to acknowledge that their relationship, while flawed, had been an important chapter in their lives. They realized that their separation had been a catalyst for personal growth, pushing them to become better versions of themselves. This understanding brought a sense of peace and acceptance that had eluded them for years. As the night drew to a close, Emily and Jack reached a mutual understanding. They agreed that while their time together had been meaningful, they had both grown in different directions. "We had something special, Emily," Jack said, his voice gentle. "But I think we've both found our paths now. I'm glad we had this chance to talk." "Me too, Jack," Emily replied, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. I think we both needed this closure. They shared a final dance, this time with a sense of peace and resolution. The music played softly in the background as they moved together, the tension and pain of the past melting away. It was a dance of forgiveness, of letting go, and of acknowledging that while their journey together had ended, it had shaped who they had become. Emily left the wedding feeling lighter, a sense of serenity replacing the turmoil that had lingered for so long. She hugged Sarah goodbye, thanking her for inviting her to the wedding. "You look happy, Emily," Sarah remarked, noticing the change in her friend's demeanor. "I think I am," Emily replied with a genuine smile. "I finally feel like I've closed that chapter." The next morning, Emily woke up with a sense of clarity and renewal. She reflected on the previous night's events, feeling a profound sense of peace. The conversation with Jack had been cathartic, allowing her to release the lingering pain and resentment she had harbored. Emily realized that she was ready to fully embrace her future, unburdened by the ghosts of her past. As she went about her day, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. She returned to her normal routine with a fresh perspective, appreciating the stability and joy she had built in her life. The closure she had found at the wedding allowed her to move forward with confidence and hope. She looked forward to new beginnings, content with the understanding that she had gained from her past experiences. The story ends with Emily standing on the balcony of her apartment, gazing out at the city skyline. She smiles, feeling a sense of fulfillment and readiness for whatever the future might hold. The chapter with Jack was finally closed, and she was prepared to write new chapters in her life, filled with hope, growth, and the promise of new adventures. Thank you for being a part of Narrative Stories. Your support and engagement mean the world to us. We are committed to bringing you the best in storytelling. What kinds of stories would you like to see next? Share your thoughts in the comments below.
Welcome to my channel, where every story comes to life. Dive into captivating narratives that spark your imagination. Let's start today new narrative story. Imagine thinking your life was perfect. Married to your best friend, raising a wonderful child, living in a beautiful house by the beach, until one simple notification turned your entire world upside down. 4. Ethan Blake, a 36-year-old financial advisor from Sydney. This wasn't just a nightmare, it was his reality. What he thought was a loving marriage became a web of deceit, unraveling in ways he never expected. Join me on this emotional roller coaster as we dive into a story of betrayal, heartbreak, and a man's quest for justice. This is not just another tale of infidelity. It's a story about finding truth where lies once thrived. Ethan Blake and his wife, Chloe Blake, live in the vibrant northern beaches of Sydney, a picturesque area known for its ocean views, affluent residents, and laid-back coastal lifestyle. Ethan is a 36-year-old financial advisor, a man of routine who works long hours to provide for his family. Chloe, 34, is a yoga instructor who is well loved in their community, admired for her beauty, charm, and graceful demeanor. Together, they have an 8-year-old son named Jack, a curious and energetic boy who is the apple of his father's eye. Their social circle consists of close friends, many of whom envy the seemingly perfect life Ethan and Chloe have. They often host barbecues on weekends, spend time with other families, and take Jack to the beach for surfing lessons. Ethan, though successful in his career, always felt that family was his greatest achievement, until everything changed. It all started on a warm Saturday afternoon. Ethan sat in their spacious backyard, enjoying a cold beer as Jack kicked a football around. The scent of eucalyptus filled the air, and the sound of distant waves crashing onto the shore provided a soothing background. Chloe was lounging on a deck chair, her phone in hand, typing furiously. "Who are you texting?" Ethan asked with a smile, hoping for a light-hearted response. "Oh, just the girls. We're organizing a yoga retreat," Chloe replied without looking up, her voice too casual, too practiced. Ethan didn't think much of it at first, but as the weeks went by, her behavior grew more secretive. She had become glued to her phone, often texting late into the night, locking her screen when he entered the room. Something felt different. They had always shared everything, but now there was a distance between them. Conversations had become more superficial, and their once regular date nights dwindled into rare occasions. Ethan, always the rational thinker, tried to dismiss his suspicions. After all, Chloe was a busy woman, and he knew his long hours at work didn't help. But there was a nagging feeling in the pit of his stomach that he couldn't shake. One evening, while Chloe was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Ethan glanced at it out of curiosity, his eyes landing on a message from someone named Josh. "Last night was incredible. Can't stop thinking about you." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Josh? Who the hell was Josh? Ethan's hands trembled as he stared at the message. His mind raced, piecing together every odd behavior Chloe had exhibited over the past few months. He quickly put the phone down when he heard the water stop, his heart pounding in his chest. He spent the next few days in a state of paranoia, watching Chloe closely, replaying moments in his head. Could she really be having an affair? Ethan had never doubted Chloe before, but now every smile, every glance at her phone seemed suspicious. His mind was consumed by the possibility. Unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, Ethan decided to take matters into his own hands. Late one night, after Chloe had fallen asleep, he installed a discreet app on her phone that synced her messages to his own. He felt a pang of guilt as he set it up, knowing it was an invasion of privacy. But Ethan needed to know the truth. He couldn't confront her without proof. For the next few days, the app picked up nothing suspicious. The messages were casual, often related to her yoga clients or friends. Ethan began to wonder if he had been overreacting, doubting himself for suspecting her. But just when he was about to uninstall the app, the real bombshell dropped. One evening, as Ethan sat alone in his home office, a series of texts between Chloe and Josh appeared on his screen. He froze, staring at the words, his world crumbling around him. Josh wasn't just some casual acquaintance. He was her lover. Josh, a 31-year-old personal trainer at Chloe's yoga studio, had been having an affair with Chloe for months. The texts were filled with flirtation, intimate details of their encounters, and plans for future meetups. Chloe had told Josh things she hadn't shared with Ethan in years, the emotional depth of their conversations, Saint, even more than the physical betrayal. She had confided in Josh, complained about her marriage, and painted Ethan as the neglectful, absent husband. Ethan's hands shook as he scrolled through the messages, each one more painful than the last. He had given his all to their marriage, to their family. How could she do this to him? To Jack? The next morning, Ethan could barely focus. His mind was racing, filled with a toxic mix of rage, sadness, and confusion. He knew he had to confront Chloe, but the thought of the conversation terrified him. He didn't want to believe it was real, but the messages were undeniable proof. There was no escaping the truth. After Jack left for school, Ethan found Chloe in the kitchen, sipping her morning coffee. She greeted him with a smile, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside him. "Chloe, we need to talk," Ethan said, his voice steady but cold. Chloe looked up, her smile faltering. "What's wrong?" Ethan placed her phone on the counter, unlocked, with the incriminating messages on display. He watched as the color drained from her face. She didn't say a word, but her eyes were filled with guilt. "I know about Josh," Ethan said, his voice shaking with emotion. "I know everything." Chloe's hands trembled as she reached for the phone, her eyes darting over the messages. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized she had been caught. She looked up at Ethan, her voice barely a whisper. "Ethan, I'm so sorry. Sorry? That's all you have to say? Ethan's voice cracked, his anger rising to the surface. You've been lying to me for months. How could you do this to us? To Jack? Chloe broke down, sobbing into her hands. She tried to explain, to justify her actions. She said she had felt lonely, neglected, that Ethan had been too focused on work and not enough on their relationship. She claimed that Josh had given her the attention she had been craving, that it had started as an emotional connection and spiraled into something more. But Ethan wasn't buying it. They had both been busy. They had both struggled with balancing work and family, but he had never strayed. He had never even considered it. Chloe's betrayal wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice, a selfish, deliberate choice. Ethan walked away from the conversation, unable to process the magnitude of what had just happened. He couldn't look at Chloe without feeling a wave of disgust and anger. He couldn't believe that the woman he had loved and trusted for over a decade had done this to him. Over the next few days, Ethan thought about his next move. He wasn't going to make any rash decisions, but he wasn't going to let Chloe off easy either. He wanted justice, for himself and for Jack. First, Ethan contacted a lawyer and began the process of filing for divorce. He made sure that their assets would be divided fairly and that Jack would be protected in the custody arrangements. Chloe had no idea that Ethan was moving so quickly behind the scenes. She thought she still had time to fix things, to repair the damage she had caused. But Ethan had no intention of letting her back into his life. Next, Ethan started subtly unraveling Chloe's reputation. They had a tight-knit circle of friends, many of whom admired Chloe for her grace and beauty. Slowly, Ethan began telling close friends about what had happened. He didn't embellish the truth or paint himself as a victim. He simply laid out the facts, allowing others to draw their own conclusions. Word spread fast. Chloe's perfect image began to crumble. Friends who once admired her now whispered behind her back. Their social circle, once filled with barbecues and weekend outings, now avoided her. Josh, the younger man she had risked everything for, quickly distanced himself from her as well. He wasn't interested in being involved in the fallout of a broken marriage, especially when it became clear that Chloe's life was unraveling. Chloe found herself isolated, her perfect life shattered. The affair had cost her more than just her marriage. It had cost her friendships, respect, and the life she had carefully crafted. Ethan, on the other hand, slowly began to rebuild his life. The divorce was painful, and adjusting to shared custody of Jack was difficult, but he was determined to move forward. He threw himself into his work, focusing on expanding his business and securing a stable future for himself and Jack. He also spent more time with Jack, making sure that his son knew he was loved and supported. They took weekend trips to the beach, went on hikes, and explored Sydney together. Jack, though young, sensed the tension between his parents, but Ethan made sure to shield him from the worst of it. He didn't want his son to carry the weight of their broken marriage. One afternoon, as Ethan and Jack walked along the shoreline, the sun setting behind them, Ethan felt a sense of peace for the first time in months. The pain of Chloe's betrayal still lingered, but it no longer consumed him. He had taken back control of his life, and he was moving forward, one step at a time. And that, my friends, is how Ethan discovered the double life his wife had been leading, hidden behind the simplicity of a mobile chat. It's a stark reminder that betrayal often starts small, with the secrets we think we can keep hidden. But the truth has a way of coming to light, no matter how deeply it's buried. What would you do if you were in Ethan's shoes? How would you handle the situation? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.
Welcome back to Cheating Tales Lab. We're so glad you're here. We've got an incredible story lined up for you today, and we hope it keeps you on the edge of your seat. Let's jump right into the story. Preston Fowler's fingers drummed an impatient rhythm on the steering wheel as he navigated through the congested streets of downtown. At 45, the architect had built a reputation for innovative, sustainable designs, but today his mind was consumed by the eco-friendly skyscraper project that was eating up his time and sanity in equal measure. As he pulled into the driveway of his suburban home, the tension in his shoulders eased slightly. The front door swung open before he could reach for his keys. Jessica, his wife of 20 years, practically bounced out to greet him, her enthusiasm seeming oddly out of place. "Preston, darling, you're home early," she chirped, her eyes gleaming with an intensity that made him pause. He glanced at his watch. "It's past 8, Jess." "Oh, is it?" She laughed, the sound a touch too high. "I guess I lost track of time. How was your day?" Preston raised an eyebrow, curiosity momentarily overriding his exhaustion. "Same as always. Meetings, revisions, more meetings." "You seem chipper." Jessica's smile widened. "I have a surprise for you," she said, practically vibrating with excitement. "A surprise?" Preston echoed, his fatigue-addled brain struggling to keep up. "Meet me at the Regal Hotel tomorrow at 7 p.m. Don't be late." The enthusiasm in her voice felt off, like a discordant note in a familiar melody. But Preston, his mind still half occupied with work concerns, simply nodded. "All right," he said, stepping past her into the house. "I'll be there. Now, if you don't mind, I need a shower." As the hot water pounded against his back, Preston's thoughts drifted. Their marriage had been distant lately, true. The passion that once burned between them had cooled to embers. But he'd been working hard, building a future for them both. Surely Jessica understood that? He stepped out of the shower, wrapping a towel around his waist. Jessica was nowhere to be seen. Probably already asleep, he thought. Or pretending to be. He sighed, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. The next evening, Preston arrived at the Regal Hotel precisely at 7 p.m., a bouquet of roses in hand. The concierge, a young man with a polite smile, directed him to a suite on the top floor. "Enjoy your evening, sir," the concierge said, a hint of knowing in his voice that made Preston's skin prickle. As the elevator ascended, a mix of anticipation and unease settled in his stomach. What was Jessica playing at? Was this her way of rekindling their romance? He knocked on the suite door, straightening his tie with his free hand. The door swung open to reveal Jessica, but she wasn't alone. A man Preston had never seen before stood behind her, a smug grin plastered across his face. "Hello, Preston," Jessica said, her voice devoid of warmth. "You're right on time. Always so dependable." Preston's eyes darted between Jessica and the stranger. "What's going on here, Jess?" Jessica's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Meet Antonio, my high school sweetheart." "Your surprise is this. I'm leaving you." Preston stood frozen, his mind refusing to process the words. Antonio sauntered forward, draping his arm around Jessica's waist. "Thanks for keeping her warm for me, chump," Antonio sneered, his eyes gleaming with malicious glee. Jessica's eyes, once warm and loving, now held only cold contempt. She tossed an envelope at Preston's feet. "Divorce papers. I've already transferred your retirement funds to my account." She paused, savoring the shock on Preston's face. "Oh, and here's a one-way ticket to Alaska. Why don't you go cool off?" The roses slipped from Preston's grasp, scattering across the plush hotel carpet. He stared at the fallen flowers, his mind reeling. "You can't be serious," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Antonio laughed, the sound grating on Preston's nerves. "Oh, she's dead serious, buddy. You snooze, you lose." Preston's shock began to give way to anger. He took a step forward, his fists clenching at his sides. "You think you can just throw away 20 years of marriage? For this high school fling?" Jessica's eyes narrowed. "Watch it, Preston. Don't make a scene. It's over. Accept it and move on." "Move on?" Preston's voice rose. "You've stolen my money, my future, and you expect me to just move on?" Antonio stepped between them, his chest puffed out. "You heard the lady. It's over. Now why don't you take that ticket and disappear? Before things get unpleasant." Preston's eyes locked with Jessica's. For a moment, He searched for any sign of the woman he'd loved for 2 decades. He found nothing but cold indifference. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice low and steady. "Both of you." He turned on his heel and walked out, leaving the roses scattered on the floor behind him. Days blurred together as Preston grappled with the betrayal. He found himself sitting in his lawyer's office, the tasteful decor a stark contrast to the chaos in his mind. Cameron Schneider, a sharp-eyed attorney with a reputation for ruthlessness in divorce cases, reviewed the situation. "Preston, I've got good news and bad news," Cameron said, leaning back in his leather chair. "The good news is, the transfer of your retirement funds was illegal. We can sue for fraud." Preston leaned forward, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "And the bad news?" Cameron's expression turned grim. "Jessica's filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. She's moving fast, trying to get ahead of us." Preston's jaw clenched, his eyes hardening. "She's the one with differences, like preferring her high school fling to her husband of 2 decades. "I understand you're angry, Preston," Cameron said, his tone measured. "But we need to approach this strategically. Emotion won't win this battle." Preston nodded, forcing himself to take a deep breath. "You're right. What's our next move?" Cameron pulled out a file, spreading documents across his desk. "We counterfile, citing adultery. It won't stop the divorce, but it could affect the division of assets." "Do it," Preston said without hesitation. Cameron nodded, then hesitated. "There's more. Jessica's visa is tied to your marriage. If we report the fraud, it'll be canceled." A glimmer of resolve sparked in Preston's eyes. He leaned forward, his voice low and determined. "Do it. And Cameron? I want everything we can legally throw at them." Cameron's lips curled into a predatory smile. "Consider it done. We'll hit them so hard they won't know what hit them." As Preston stood to leave, Cameron called out, "Preston, one more thing. Don't contact Jessica or that Antonio character. Let them think you're licking your wounds. The element of surprise will be our best weapon." Preston nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "Don't worry, Cameron. I've got no interest in talking to either of them. But they'll hear from me soon enough." Preston threw himself into his work, channeling his pain and anger into the skyscraper project. His colleagues noticed the change, the increased intensity in his eyes, the longer hours he put in, but no one dared to mention it. Late one evening, as he was leaving the office, a conversation between 2 junior architects caught his attention. "Did you hear about that international competition?" one of them asked, excitement evident in his voice. "Yeah, the Sustainable City Project, right?" the other replied. "The prize is huge." Preston slowed his pace, listening intently. "But there's a catch," the first one continued. "You need to work with a partner from a developing country." "Seriously? That's going to make things complicated." Preston paused, an idea forming. He turned back, startling the 2 younger men. "Tell me more about this competition," he said, his tone brooking no argument. 20 minutes later, Preston was back at his desk, furiously researching. Hours ticked by as he scoured the internet, looking for the perfect partner. As dawn broke, casting long shadows across his office, he stumbled upon a promising lead. A talented but unknown architect in Jessica's home country. A smile spread across Preston's face. 2 birds, 1 stone, he muttered, reaching for his phone to make travel arrangements. As he booked his flight, Preston's mind raced with possibilities. This wasn't just about winning a competition anymore. It was about rebuilding his life and exacting justice. Jessica and Antonio had tried to break him, but they'd only succeeded in unleashing a side of him they never knew existed. He pulled up Jessica's social media profiles, noting with disgust the lovey-dovey photos she'd already posted with Antonio. "Enjoy it while it lasts," he muttered, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. For a moment, he considered leaving a scathing comment. But no, that would tip his hand. Instead, he closed the browser and pulled up his email. He had work to do, plans to make. Jessica and Antonio thought they'd won, that they'd left him broken and defeated. They couldn't be more wrong. Preston Fowler, the mild-mannered architect, was gone. In his place stood a man determined to not just survive, but to thrive, and to make those who betrayed him pay dearly for their mistakes. As the first rays of sunlight crept through his office window, Preston allowed himself a moment of reflection. The pain of betrayal still burned, but it was fuel now, driving him forward. He'd trusted too easily, loved too blindly. Never again. He picked up the phone, dialing Cameron's number. It was early, but he knew his lawyer would be up. "Cameron? It's Preston. I need you to do something for me." The stale air of the airplane cabin did little to clear Preston's head as he touched down in Jessica's home country. The 14-hour flight had given him ample time to stew in his anger, to plot his next moves. As he stepped off the plane, he straightened his tie and set his jaw. This wasn't just a business trip. This was war. Preston's contact, a local architect named Maureen, was waiting for him at the arrival's gate. She was younger than he expected, probably in her early 30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Mr. Fowler?" she asked, extending her hand. Her grip was firm, professional. Preston nodded, shaking her hand. "Call me Preston." "Thank you for meeting me on such short notice, Maureen." They made their way to a nearby cafe, the bustle of the airport fading into background noise. As they sat down with their coffees, Maureen got straight to the point. "Your email was intriguing," she said, her eyes studying Preston's face. "But I have to ask, why me? You're already successful. You could partner with anyone for this competition." Preston took a sip of his coffee, buying himself a moment to choose his words carefully. He'd prepared for this question, knew he needed to strike the right balance between honesty and strategy. "Your designs are revolutionary," he said, meeting her gaze. "I've been following your work for a while now. The way you integrate local materials and traditional techniques into modern, sustainable structures. It's exactly what this competition is looking for." Maureen's eyebrow arched skeptically. "Flattery will get you nowhere, Mr. Fowler. What's the real reason?" Preston's lips twitched in a hint of a smile. He appreciated her directness. "All right, cards on the table. I'm going through a personal upheaval. My wife left me, tried to clean out my accounts. I need this win, both professionally and personally. And I believe that together, we could not only win this competition but change the face of sustainable architecture." He watched as Maureen processed this information, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "And what do I get out of this, besides a chance at a prize that's not guaranteed?" "Exposure," Preston said without hesitation. "Win or lose, you'll be working with one of the top firms in sustainable design. It's a foot in the door of an industry that, let's face it, isn't always welcoming to women, especially in this part of the world." Maureen's eyes narrowed, but Preston could see the spark of interest there. "You've done your homework," she said. Preston nodded. "I believe in being prepared. So, what do you say? Partners?" Maureen was silent for a long moment, her fingers tapping a rhythmless beat on the table. Finally, she extended her hand. "Partners," she said. "But I warn you, Mr. Fowler, I don't tolerate being used or manipulated. If I sense any funny business, I'm out. Understood?" Preston shook her hand, a genuine smile crossing his face for the first time in weeks. "Understood. And please, it's Preston. We're partners now, after all." As they left the cafe, diving into the humid air of the city, Preston felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The first piece of his plan was in place. Jessica and Antonio might think they'd broken him, but they had no idea what was coming. Across the ocean, Jessica and Antonio were living it up, oblivious to the storm brewing. They'd moved into a penthouse apartment, paid for with Preston's stolen retirement funds. Jessica lounged by the rooftop pool, sipping champagne as Antonio massaged her shoulders. "You know," Antonio said, his hands working out a knot in Jessica's neck, "I could get used to this life." Jessica laughed, the sound echoing across the empty rooftop. "Well, get used to it, baby. We've got plenty to spare." Antonio's hands paused. "About that, how long do you think it'll take before the money transfer gets noticed?" Jessica waved her hand dismissively. "Please. Preston's probably crying into his blueprints right now. By the time he figures it out, if he ever does, we'll be long gone." She turned, pulling Antonio in for a kiss. "Now stop worrying and pour me another glass. We've got a lot of lost time to make up for." As they clinked their glasses together, neither of them noticed the dark clouds gathering on the horizon. The storm was coming, whether they were ready or not. Preston hunched over the drafting table, his pen flying across the paper. Across from him, Maureen was deep in concentration, her computer screen flickering with complex 3D models. They'd been working nonstop for weeks, their design for a self-sustaining city taking shape before their eyes. What if we integrated vertical farming here? Maureen suggested, pointing to a section of the model. It would increase food production and add a unique aesthetic element. Preston nodded, quickly sketching the idea. Brilliant. And if we use native plants, it'll tie into the local ecosystem. Their partnership had flourished beyond Preston's wildest expectations. Maureen's innovative ideas perfectly complemented his technical expertise. As their design gained traction in the competition, Preston felt a surge of satisfaction. This was more than just a professional triumph. It was the first step in his plan for revenge. But even as he threw himself into the project, Preston hadn't forgotten about Jessica. In his spare moments, he'd been discreetly gathering information about her past in her home country. Every scrap of intel was carefully filed away, ammunition for the battle to come. His phone buzzed, Cameron's name flashing on the screen. Preston excused himself, stepping out onto the balcony of their rented workspace. Cameron, what's the news? His lawyer's voice crackled over the line. The fraud case is solid, Preston. We've got her dead to rights on the retirement fund transfer. But there's more. We're pushing for an annulment based on Jessica's infidelity. Preston's grip tightened on the phone. Excellent. What's the catch? I hear a but coming. Cameron sighed. But there's a complication. She's trying to claim half your business assets. Says she supported you while you built the company, so she's entitled to a share. Preston's eyes narrowed, his free hand clenching into a fist. Not for long, she's not. What are you planning, Preston? Cameron asked, a note of concern in his voice. Don't worry about it, Preston said. Just keep the legal pressure on. I'll handle the rest. He ended the call, his mind already racing. Jessica thought she could take half his company? She had another thing coming. Over the next few days, Preston initiated a series of careful maneuvers. He restructured his company, moving assets into protected trusts and offshore accounts. It was all perfectly legal, if a bit ethically gray. But Preston was past caring about ethics. This was about survival. As he worked, he kept one eye on the competition. Their design was gaining attention, industry insiders whispering about the dark horse team that was shaking things up. Preston allowed himself a smile. Let Jessica and Antonio think they'd won. The game was just beginning. Jessica frowned at the bank statement, her manicured nail tapping against the screen of her tablet. Antonio, she called, her voice sharp. Come look at this. Antonio sauntered in from the bedroom, still buttoning up his silk shirt. What is it, babe? The money, Jessica said, thrusting the tablet at him. It's not all there. Antonio's brow furrowed as he looked at the numbers. What do you mean? Did you spend more than you thought? Jessica shot him a glare. Don't be stupid. I know exactly how much I've spent. This is something else. She paced the room, her mind racing. It's Preston. It has to be. That sneaky bastard is up to something. Antonio flopped onto the couch, looking unconcerned. So what? We still have plenty. And by the time he figures out how to get it back, we'll be long gone. Jessica whirled on him, her eyes flashing. You don't get it, do you? This isn't just about the money. It's about winning. And I refuse to let that pathetic excuse for a man beat me. She grabbed her phone, furiously tapping out a message. We need to hit back. Hard. What are you thinking? Antonio asked, a hint of nervousness creeping into his voice. Jessica's lips curved into a cruel smile. Preston's always been so proud of his precious skyscraper project. What if something were to go wrong? Over the next few days, Jessica and Antonio launched their counterattack. They spread rumors about structural instabilities in Preston's eco-friendly skyscraper, whispering to investors and city officials about potential safety hazards. But Preston was one step ahead. He'd anticipated their move, had been preparing for it since the moment Jessica betrayed him. Every stage of the project had been meticulously documented, every safety measure triple-checked and verified by independent experts. When the rumors reached fever pitch, Preston calmly presented his evidence. Blueprints, safety reports, material analyses, all laid out in a press conference that left no room for doubt. The attempted sabotage backfired spectacularly, damaging Jessica and Antonio's credibility instead. As Preston wrapped up the press conference, fielding questions from reporters with ease, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Maureen. Saw the news. Nicely done. But we've got work to do. Competition deadlines coming up. Preston allowed himself a small smile as he texted back. On my way. Let's show them what real innovation looks like. Across town, Jessica threw her phone against the wall, watching with satisfaction as it shattered. That bastard, she seethed. How does he always stay one step ahead? Antonio, lounging on the couch, barely looked up from his magazine. Maybe it's time to cut our losses, babe. We've still got enough. Enough? Jessica interrupted, her voice rising to a shriek. It's not about enough. It's about winning. And I refuse to let Preston win. She stormed over to the liquor cabinet, pouring herself a generous glass of scotch. As she drank, her mind raced. The money was dwindling faster than she'd anticipated. Preston was outmaneuvering her at every turn. She needed to act fast. We need to speed up the divorce proceedings, she said, more to herself than to Antonio. Secure what assets we can before Preston can protect them all. Antonio finally looked up, a hint of concern in his eyes. Jess, maybe we should. Shut up, Jessica snapped. I'm not asking for your opinion. Just do as I say. Got it? As Antonio nodded meekly, Jessica turned to stare out the window at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, Preston was plotting his next move. But she'd be damned if she'd let him win. This war was far from over. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Architects, investors, and media from around the world had gathered for the final presentations of the International Sustainable City Design Competition. Preston stood backstage, his heart pounding. Months of work, sleepless nights, and relentless planning had led to this moment. Maureen approached, her face a mask of calm determination. Ready? Preston nodded, straightening his tie. Born ready. As they waited for their turn, Preston's eyes scanned the audience. His breath caught in his throat as he spotted two familiar faces. Jessica and Antonio sat near the back, whispering to each other and smirking. They'd come to gloat, no doubt expecting him to fail. Looks like we have some unexpected guests, Maureen muttered, following Preston's gaze. Preston's jaw clenched. Good. Let them watch. Next up, presenting their design for a self-sustaining urban ecosystem, Preston Fowler and Maureen Kigali. The announcer's voice boomed. As they took the stage, Preston locked eyes with Jessica for a brief moment. Her smug smile only fueled his determination. He turned to the judges, his voice steady and confident as he began their presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're about to see isn't just a city. It's a living, breathing ecosystem that will revolutionize urban living. For the next 30 minutes, Preston and Maureen laid out their vision. They detailed the vertical farms integrated into residential towers, the revolutionary waste management system that turned garbage into energy, and the network of green spaces that served both recreational and environmental purposes. As Maureen explained the cultural aspects of their design, Preston glanced at Jessica and Antonio. Their smiles had faded, replaced by looks of growing unease. The judges peppered them with questions, which Preston and Maureen fielded with ease. Their preparation paid off as they addressed every concern and elaborated on the finer points of their design. As they concluded, the audience erupted into applause. Preston allowed himself a small smile. They'd nailed it. Hours later, after all the presentations were complete, the judges returned to announce the winner. After careful deliberation, the head judge began. We are pleased to announce that the winner of this year's International Sustainable City Design Competition is Preston Fowler and Maureen Kigali. The auditorium exploded with cheers. Preston and Maureen embraced, both of them grinning from ear to ear. As they made their way to the stage to accept their award, Preston caught sight of Jessica and Antonio slinking towards the exit, their faces twisted with anger and disappointment. The next hour was a whirlwind of congratulations, interviews, and handshakes. Preston's phone buzzed constantly with messages from colleagues and potential clients. This win wasn't just a personal triumph, it was a game-changer for his career. As the crowd began to thin, Preston spotted Jessica making her way towards him. Her face was a mask of false cheer, but he could see the calculation in her eyes. "Preston, darling," she called, her voice sickly sweet. "Congratulations on your win. I always knew you had it in you." Preston turned to face her, his expression cold. "Save it, Jessica. We both know you came here hoping to see me fail." Jessica's smile faltered. "Now, that's not fair." "You what?" Preston interrupted. "Thought you'd swoop in and take credit? Try to weasel your way back into my life now that I'm successful again." He leaned in close, his voice low. "Let me make this clear. You're nothing to me now. Nothing but a mistake I'm in the process of erasing." Jessica's face contorted with rage. "You bastard. You think you've won? This isn't over." Preston smiled, a cold, ruthless expression that made Jessica take a step back. "Oh, it's far from over. But trust me, you won't like how it ends." He turned his back on her, rejoining Maureen and a group of investors who were eagerly discussing future projects. As he engaged in the conversation, Preston could feel Jessica's glare boring into his back. But for the first time since her betrayal, he felt nothing but satisfaction. The tables had turned, and Jessica was about to learn just how badly she'd miscalculated. The courthouse loomed before Preston, a monument to justice that would soon become the stage for his final act of retribution. He straightened his tie, his face a mask of calm determination as he climbed the steps. Inside, he found Cameron waiting, a thick briefcase in hand. "Ready for this?" the lawyer asked, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. Preston nodded. "More than ready. Let's finish this." They entered the courtroom, the wooden doors creaking ominously behind them. Jessica and Antonio were already there, huddled with their lawyer. Jessica shot Preston a venomous glare as he took his seat, but he ignored her, focusing instead on the task at hand. The judge entered, and the court fell silent. "We're here today in the matter of Fowler versus Fowler," she announced, her voice echoing in the hushed room. "Mr. Schneider, you may present your case." Cameron stood, his presence commanding the room. "Your Honor, what we have here is not just a simple divorce case. This is a story of betrayal, fraud, and malicious intent." Over the next hour, Cameron laid out their case with surgical precision. He presented evidence of Jessica's infidelity, complete with time-stamped photos and hotel receipts. He detailed the illegal transfer of Preston's retirement funds, showing bank statements and tracing the money trail. "But Your Honor," Cameron continued, his voice rising with controlled indignation, "the defendant's actions go beyond mere infidelity and theft. They actively attempted to sabotage my client's professional reputation." He presented affidavits from investors and city officials, revealing Jessica and Antonio's attempts to spread false rumors about Preston's skyscraper project. Email trails and recorded phone calls painted a damning picture of their malicious campaign. As Cameron spoke, Preston watched Jessica's face. Her confident smirk had long since faded, replaced by a look of growing panic. Antonio, for his part, looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Cameron said, producing a final set of documents, "we have evidence of the defendant's past indiscretions in her home country. Actions that, if brought to light, could have serious consequences for her immigration status." Jessica's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. She hadn't expected this, hadn't realized how thoroughly Preston had investigated her past. The judge's face grew increasingly stern as she reviewed the evidence. When Cameron finally concluded, she turned to Jessica's lawyer. "Counselor, do you have anything to add in your client's defense?" Jessica's lawyer, a nervous-looking man who seemed out of his depth, stuttered through a weak rebuttal. His argument sounded hollow in the face of the mountain of evidence Cameron had presented. After a brief recess, the judge returned to deliver her verdict. The courtroom held its breath. In light of the overwhelming evidence presented, the judge began, her voice filled with disgust. "I rule entirely in favor of the plaintiff, Preston Fowler. The marriage is hereby annulled on grounds of fraud and infidelity." All of Mrs. Fowler's claims to Mr. Fowler's assets are dismissed. Preston allowed himself a small smile as the judge continued. Furthermore, Mrs. Fowler is ordered to repay the stolen retirement funds with interest. And given the evidence of her past indiscretions and current illegal activities, I am recommending a full investigation into her immigration status. Jessica's face drained of color. She turned to Antonio, but he was already inching away from her, his eyes darting towards the exit. As the judge's gavel fell, Preston stood, buttoning his jacket. He looked at Jessica, seeing not the woman he had loved for 20 years, but a stranger who had tried to destroy him. "I told you this wasn't over," he said quietly as he passed her. "Enjoy your trip home." Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for a statement. Preston paused on the steps, Cameron at his side. "Mr. Fowler, how do you feel about the verdict?" Preston straightened his tie, his face a mask of professional calm. "Justice has been served," he said simply. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a city to build." As he walked away, leaving the chaos behind him, Preston felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The betrayal that had nearly broken him was now nothing more than a closed chapter in his life. Ahead lay new challenges, new triumphs. And this time, he'd face them on his own terms. Months passed like pages turning in a book, each one filled with victories both personal and professional. Preston stood atop his completed skyscraper, the wind whipping at his suit as he surveyed the city sprawling below. The eco-friendly building was a testament to his vision, a gleaming beacon of sustainable architecture that had already become a landmark. The door to the roof opened, and Maureen stepped out to join him. In the months since their competition win, she had become more than just a partner. She was a friend, a confidant, and a driving force in their newly formed international firm. "Quite a view," Maureen said, coming to stand beside him. "Hard to believe how far we've come in such a short time." Preston nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "It's been quite a journey." Maureen leaned against the railing, her eyes sparkling with barely contained excitement. "I've got some news," she said. "I heard through the grapevine about Jessica and Antonio." Preston raised an eyebrow, curious despite himself. "Oh, they were last seen arguing at the airport," Maureen said, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. "Apparently, he dumped her when the money ran out. Left her high and dry at the departure gate." Preston absorbed this information, surprised to find that he felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, not even pity. Just nothing. "Karma," he said simply. Maureen studied his face for a moment, then nodded, seemingly satisfied with what she saw. "So," she said, changing the subject, "shall we discuss our next project? I've got some ideas for that renewal contract in Singapore." As they delved into the details of their upcoming work, Preston found his mind wandering. He thought about the man he had been just a year ago. Trusting, naive, blindsided by betrayal. That man was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more cautious, but also more fulfilled. The betrayal had nearly broken him, it was true. But from those broken pieces, he had built something far greater than he had ever imagined. A thriving international firm, a reputation as a pioneer in sustainable architecture, and genuine connections with people who valued him for his skills and his character, not what they could take from him. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Preston allowed himself a moment of reflection. He had not just survived, he had thrived. The city below, with its bustling streets and soaring buildings, seemed to pulse with possibility. And he was ready to shape it, one innovative design at a time. "You know," he said to Maureen, interrupting her mid-sentence about solar panel efficiency, "I think we're going to need a bigger office." Maureen laughed, the sound carried away by the wind. "Dreaming big again, are we?" Preston smiled, a genuine, warm expression that reached his eyes. "Always," he said. "After all, why stop now?" As they turned to head back inside, Preston cast one last look at the city skyline. The past was behind him, a closed book. Ahead lay endless possibilities, a future limited only by his imagination and will. And for the first time in a long time, Preston Fowler was excited to see what tomorrow would bring.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.